The messenger arrived at sunset. He was a small creature, barely 4 feet tall, with green skin and yellow eyes that glowed in the dying light. His armor was crude iron, and he carried a black flag with a skull painted in blood. The guards at the gate of Millbrook stopped him with their spears, but they did not kill him. Messengers were protected by the old laws, even goblin messengers. The creature smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. He handed a scroll to the captain of the guard, and then sat down on a rock to wait. The captain, a man named Thomas Reed, unrolled the scroll and read it twice. His face went pale. Then he ran toward the town hall as fast as his legs could carry him. Mayor Helena Cross was eating dinner with her family when Thomas burst through the door. She looked at his face and immediately sent her children upstairs. Thomas handed her the scroll without speaking. Helena read it slowly, her lips moving with each word. The message was simple. Warlord Grukash the Destroyer had surrounded the town with 10,000 goblin warriors. The humans had until dawn to surrender completely. Every person would become a slave. Every piece of gold would belong to the warlord. Every weapon would be handed over. If they refused, the goblins would attack at first light and kill everyone. There would be no mercy. There would be no prisoners. The choice was surrender or death. Helena put down the scroll and looked at Thomas. How many fighting men do we have? 300. Maybe 400 if we count the old veterans and the young boys who can hold a sword. And they have 10,000? That is what the scouts say. They came from the northern mountains. They have been gathering for months. This is not a raid, Mayor. This is an invasion. Helena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was steel in her gaze. Ring the bell. Call everyone to the square. We need to talk. Within an hour, the entire town had gathered in the central square. There were about 2,000 people in Millbrook, farmers and blacksmiths and merchants and their families. They stood in the cold night air, their breath making clouds in front of their faces. They whispered to each other, trying to understand why they had been called. Helena stood on the steps of the town hall and raised her hand for silence. The whispers stopped. She told them everything. She read the scroll aloud so that everyone could hear. When she finished, there was complete silence. Then the chaos began. Some people screamed. Some people cried. Some people started arguing about what to do. A few men shouted that they should surrender immediately, that fighting was madness, that their lives were more valuable than their freedom. Others shouted back that death was better than slavery, that they would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. An old man pushed his way to the front of the crowd. His name was Samuel Gray, and he was 87 years old. He had been a soldier once, many decades ago, when humans had fought the last great war against the goblin tribes. He walked with a cane, and his hands shook with age, but his voice was still strong. "May I speak?" he asked. Helena nodded. Samuel turned to face the crowd. "I was 17 years old when the goblins came to my village. They gave us the same choice, surrender or die. My father chose to surrender. He thought he was saving our lives. Do you know what happened?" No one answered. They worked us like animals. They beat us every day. They gave us scraps to eat while they feasted on our food. My mother died in the first winter. My sister died the second. My father lasted 3 years before his heart gave out. I escaped by hiding in a pile of dead bodies and crawling through a sewer. I was the only one from my village who survived. He paused, letting his words sink in. Surrender is not life. Surrender is slow death. Surrender is watching everyone you love suffer until they break. I would rather die fighting than surrender again. But that is my choice. You must make your own. Another voice rose from the crowd. It was a young woman named Maria, a blacksmith's daughter. She was tall and strong, with arms muscled from years of working at the forge. The goblins think we are weak because we are farmers and merchants. They think we will bow down like sheep. But my grandfather killed a goblin raider with a hammer when he was 70 years old. My grandmother shot 2 more with a crossbow. We are not as weak as they think. More voices joined in. A farmer named John said he would rather burn his fields than let goblins eat his crops. A mother named Elizabeth said she would fight with a kitchen knife if she had to. A young boy, no more than 12, said he had been practicing with his father's bow and could hit a target from 50 feet. Helena listened to all of them. Then she raised her hand again. We will vote. Those who wish to surrender, stand on the left side of the square. Those who wish to fight, stand on the right. The crowd began to move. Some walked left, their heads hanging with shame and fear, but most walked right. When the movement stopped, Helena counted quickly. About 300 people stood on the left. More than 1,700 stood on the right. The decision is made, Helena said. We fight, but those who wish to surrender are free to leave. Take the south road. The goblins are not watching it yet. Go to the next town and warn them what is coming. About half of those who had chosen surrender took the offer and left into the night. The rest changed their minds and joined the fighters. Helena did not judge either group. Fear was natural. Courage was a choice. Now the real work began. They had about 8 hours until dawn. 8 hours to prepare for an army of 10,000. Thomas Reed organized the defense. The town had walls, but they were old and not very high. They would slow the goblins, but not stop them. He placed archers on every roof and tower. He ordered barricades built in every street. He told the blacksmiths to work through the night making arrows and spears. Helena went to the grain storage and ordered all the lamp oil brought out. She had an idea. A terrible, wonderful idea. Maria the blacksmith worked faster than she had ever worked in her life. Her hammer rang against the anvil without stopping. She made spearheads and arrowheads and simple blades that could be attached to farming tools. Other blacksmiths joined her, and soon the night was filled with the sound of metal being shaped into weapons. The women who could not fight prepared bandages and boiled water for treating wounds. The children too young to carry weapons were sent to the cellars with instructions to stay quiet no matter what they heard. Samuel Gray could not fight, but he could teach. He gathered the young men who had never seen battle and told them everything he knew. How goblins attack in waves. How they try to overwhelm with numbers. How they fear fire and hate bright light. How they always protect their leaders because their morale breaks when their commanders die. Find the ones with the fancy armor, Samuel said. Kill them first. The regular goblins will scatter like rats. At midnight, Helena climbed to the top of the bell tower and looked out at the goblin army. Their campfires stretched across the northern fields like a sea of orange stars. She could hear them singing their war songs, ugly sounds that made her skin crawl. They were confident. They were celebrating their victory before the battle even began. She smiled. At 3 a.m, a small group of volunteers crept out of the town through a hidden drainage tunnel. They carried bottles filled with lamp oil and rags stuffed into the tops. They moved like shadows through the tall grass until they reached the edge of the goblin camp. The goblins were sleeping now, tired from their marching and their singing. Only a few guards were awake, and they were watching the town, not the dark fields behind them. The volunteers lit their rags and threw the bottles into the camp. Fire exploded everywhere. Tents burst into flames. Sleeping goblins woke up screaming. Panic spread through the camp like wildfire. The volunteers ran back toward the town, but not before throwing more bottles, spreading the fire wider and wider. By the time Warlord Grukash understood what was happening, a third of his camp was burning. He screamed orders at his soldiers, but they were too confused to listen. Some tried to put out the fires. Some grabbed their weapons and looked for enemies to kill. Some simply ran. Grukash was furious. He had expected the humans to cower in fear until dawn. Instead, they had attacked him. They had dared to strike first. He grabbed his war horn and blew it 3 times, the signal for an immediate assault. The goblins would attack now in the darkness, without their full strength. It was a mistake born of rage. The Goblin army charged toward the town in chaos. There was no formation, no strategy. They ran toward the walls in scattered groups, screaming for blood. The archers were waiting. Arrows rained down from every rooftop. Goblins fell by the dozens. The barricades slowed their advance, forcing them into narrow streets where defenders with spears waited behind wooden shields. The fighting was brutal and close, but the humans held their ground. Thomas Reed fought in the front line, his sword cutting through goblin after goblin. He was wounded 3 times, but kept fighting. Maria stood beside him, swinging a hammer that crushed goblin skulls with every blow. Old Samuel watched from a window, shouting advice and warnings whenever he saw a new wave coming. The battle lasted for 4 hours. As the sun began to rise, the Goblin army finally broke. They had lost more than 3,000 warriors. Their leaders were dead, killed by archers who followed Samuel's advice. Their morale was shattered. Warlord Grukash tried to rally his troops, but a young farmer named Peter put an arrow through his throat. The warlord fell from his mount, choking on his own blood, and his personal guards fled into the forest. By full sunrise, it was over. The remaining goblins scattered in every direction, running back toward the mountains they had come from. They would not return for many years. The legend of Millbrook would spread through the goblin tribes, a warning about what happened when humans chose to fight. Helena stood on the burned and bloody walls, watching the goblins retreat. She was exhausted. She was wounded. She had lost friends and neighbors in the night, but she was alive and she was free. A young girl tugged at her sleeve. "We won?" the child asked. Helena nodded. "We won. How? They had so many more soldiers than us." Helena looked at the child and smiled despite her tiredness. "Because they expected us to be afraid. They expected us to surrender. They did not understand that humans do not break so easily. We are stubborn creatures. We fight for what we love, even when the odds are against us. Especially when the odds are against us." The child thought about this for a moment. Will they come back? Maybe someday, but now they know the cost. And we will be ready. The town buried their dead with honor and rebuilt their walls stronger than before. They never forgot that night, and they taught their children and their children's children about the Battle of Millbrook, about how a small town of farmers and merchants stood against an army and refused to kneel. And somewhere in the dark mountains, the goblins remembered too. They spoke of the humans in whispers, with fear in their yellow eyes. They had learned a lesson that night, a lesson they would never forget. Humans do not surrender. Humans fight. And when humans fight, even monsters learn to be afraid.